Right, our next guest is the wonderful David Lowbridge-Ellis, who is joining us through all sorts of adversity this morning. David, it's so good to see you. How are you?
I'm
I'll
fine.
present.
Yeah, I'm not on mute, am I? Just
Yeah.
checking. There we are. I am COVID positive, however, which which I only found out an hour and a half ago. So my husband has just tested positive as well. So we're going to enjoy our 7th wedding anniversary. Not as planned, but yeah. Anyway, we'll make our best of it anyway.
Good to have you. Go for it.
Okay, thank you. So there we go. Okay, so I've called this session is gay. Just, it does what it says on the tin. I'll explain why I've called it that in just a minute. Let me just make sure I can move them. There we go. So just in terms of who I am, I'm not going to give you my entire boring life story. I lead on school improvement across Matrix Academy Trust in the West Midlands, and there are all our schools and things below. I'm an English teacher for the last 18 years. I'm also very well aware of my privilege. I'm white, middle class, cisgendered, ish, although I'm not particular, and about any particular gender identity. The more you look into gender, the more interesting it gets. I'm ginger as well, so only 2% of the world's population, ginger and proud, and I'm also gay. Which is what I'm going to talk about today. So, as I say, I've written loads and loads of stuff about this over the years, so I'm not going to retread any of that. But if you're interested, there's some of the publications and blogs and things and all that sort of stuff if you are interested. And you can find all of that through Twitter if you're really interested. So, why have I called this session gay? That's because it is. And Charlotte, there have been so many really great sessions already today that have touched on language. And I thought, what can I realistically do in 10 minutes that could have an impact on people, that people will actually find useful? And I thought, I'm just going to focus on one word, because this one word unpacks quite a lot of issues, and also give you some practical strategies for how you can use this word to teach pupils, but also you can use this approach to teach any words related to diversity. So why this particular word? Well, obviously, I have a personal investment here. I grew up in the 1980s and 1990s. If we're talking about legacy, which is the theme of today, then the legacy of the Conservative government of the 1980s was that they made it more or less forbidden, mostly more, to tell kids that it was okay to be gay in school. You've got that famous speech by Margaret Thatcher about that children are being cheated of life if they're told they're okay to be gay. So the consequence of that was not great. So I grew up in an era where the word gay was usually synonymous with fear and death, shame, and all of that horrible stuff, which, to be perfectly honest, as a 39-year-old, I am still unpicking some of that stuff. And hopefully the younger people in the audience today won't be quite as weighed down by some of that stuff. But if you are, maybe some of this stuff that I'm going to talk about is going to help. I wasn't sure whether to put this in, to be honest, because it's a nice, bright, sunny day on a Saturday, and some of these words are not very nice I'm about to put on the screen. And if you were homophobically bullied at school, which, let's face it, a lot of people are, and you don't have to be LGBTQ plus to be homophobically, transphobically, or biphobically bullied. So bearing that in mind, just to kind of talk about the impact of what the Conservative government doing was, there was a 2001 survey, which is the year after I finished school, of English and Welsh pupils. And these were the words that were said to be used to slag people off in the school playground. That was the phrase that the researchers used. So I'm not going to read out those words because they are horrendous terms. The last two in particular were very common at my primary and secondary schools. An interesting finding, though, beyond the remit of gay today, is that actually sexist terms are even more common in 2001. And I don't know if they still are today. I couldn't find a more recent study that did the same thing. Let's go on with racist terms, and pupils were less likely to see homophobic terms as a problem. And that's the key thing, really, because the word gay is synonymous with negativity in the vernacular out there in everyday language. A lot of pupils I've found over the years don't initially see it as a problem. So sometimes that problem seems unsurmountable. And I not in our trust, but I've talked to senior leaders who are like, we can't do anything about this. It's just something there in the language. And my answer to that one always is, well, yes, you can actually. And we need to use the words gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, and all of the other terms in the correct way. Because when we do that, we tell people it's okay. Now, I actually wrote a Assembly called It's Okay, and I published it in the LGBT Ed book last year, I think it was. So if you want to read that, that's fine, or I can send you a copy of the original file if you're really interested, if you want to run it at your school, or you know someone at your school who does. But the best way to teach children the correct meanings of words, and that's what I'm gonna focus on for the few minutes I've got left, is to sometimes tell them what the word doesn't mean. So when I was at school, a piece of boring geography homework was gay. Dropping food down your shirt at lunchtime was gay. High-tech trainers, which were the worst brand in the world when I was at school, were gay. Nowadays, a child dropping their phone, unless you're in a mobile phone school like some of ours are, but a child dropping their phone on the floor is gay. Testing positive for COVID could be said to be gay. No, it couldn't. It's not right. So obviously, Stonewall have done a campaign over the years, which a really good campaign of some years ago, which was "Let's get the meaning straight." And I've done lots of training with staff on this. So even things like on the way to a lesson, you overhear someone saying that's so gay. Not in the right sense, not in the sense of that we want children to be using it in. And sometimes staff just need the right words to be able to kind of come back to that. So I'm not going to read those aloud, but they're some of the sorts of words that people might use to kind of combat that sort of thing if you're very pinched for time. The best thing that you can do, though, is really go to town on it. Now, I know many people in the audience will be familiar, and I'm an English teacher. I know there's lots of English teachers on here today, and you'll be very familiar with Freya diagrams, which have become quite an in thing over the last few years. And I absolutely love a Freya diagram. I'm so sad whenever I see a Freya diagram in a lesson when I'm walking between classrooms and in schools. I immediately go, wow, amazing Freya diagram, and talk to the teacher about it. And well, yeah, so it's something we're really, really big on. But a Freya diagram is essentially going to town on a single word. And the best way to teach people the meanings of words and get them to lodge in their heads is to go to town on it. Use the non-examples like I've talked about there. Give them an explanation. So, talk the word gay is something related to people who are attracted to people of the same sex when you use it as an adjective. It can be an umbrella term, but sometimes it can exclude. And it was a medical term, but now we probably shouldn't be using it as a medical term. So you can kind of give them an explanation of it. You can also go into some etymology of it. So, a lot of people are quite surprised. So if you're reading a text with a group of children from the 1950s and 1960s, the meaning of homosexual for gay was actually there in the 1950s and 1960s. It was coexisting alongside the earlier term for happy and bright. So it was recorded in the Oxford English Dictionary in this country in 1935. The lame and rubbish one actually wasn't recorded in our dictionaries until 2003, after I left school. So that's an interesting one, but recorded earlier in the USA. And of course, it was used in the sense of lame or rubbish when I was in school myself. So it just takes dictionaries a long time to catch up. And the final way to teach pupils and get it embedded in their memories, the particular meaning of a word is, of course, and probably the most powerful way of all, is to use examples. So we have some some famous and some less famous examples of some queer people here, including on the top left-hand side, Sophie Wilson, which is great to bring in computer science. We've got Shakespeare over the right-hand side. And I don't have time to go through all the other examples, but I've written a blog about each of these people. So if you're interested, I can send you the links for that. So that's it, really. That's how you go about, and I think one of the things that I wish my teachers had done at school is use these words in the right way. So the amount of times we came across gay in a text, and the amount of times we came across words which some teachers might shy away from. Vicky and Rebecca were talking about the right words to use for things we don't like talking about, taboo words. The best thing to do with words that are taboo is to deal with those words and unpack them and understand why they might be interpreted in different ways. And something Charlotte just said, which I found really resonant, and I find all the time in my school improvement work across our trust, is that tweaks build a culture. So if you empower your teachers, which hopefully you in your schools are empowered, but there's nothing stopping you doing this in your own classroom, if you take those opportunities when they arise. I'm not talking about rewriting the entire curriculum. I mean, that's a good thing to do, to make sure there is more diversity threaded through the curriculum. But when you come across words like gay, take those opportunities to really go to town on them and make sure that you you teach the pupils the things that really I should have been taught at school, and I bet most people in the audience still weren't taught at school. If you've got any examples of everyday opportunities where you at the moment teach queer knowledge in particular, I'm actually writing a blog for one of the major exam boards at the moment about this. So if you are interested, get in touch with me, and the best way to do that is through Twitter. Okay.
And just thinking about the legacy of Section 28. I mean, for some of the teachers and mentors on the call, they're not old enough to know any different because they weren't training in that period. What are your thoughts about the damage that Section 28 just did to our profession and did to our schools?
It's a shout out to this book, by the way, which has just been published by another linguist called Paul Baker. There he is. Which is really, really good. I didn't know the half of it, if I'm brutally honest. I didn't know any of it when I was at school myself, what the legacy of Section 28 was. I know that Section 28 has kind of become a bit more high profile in recent years because of various anniversaries and things. And it was actually a conversation on one of the series of Drag Race a year or so ago. So that raised its profile. And yeah, when I do training for senior leaders on that, I go into that more. But essentially the legacy was that the vast majority of teachers, apart from really brave souls like Sue Sanders, who co-founded LGBT History Month, who was very out and proud and walked in as a cover teacher and said, I'm Mrs. Sanders and I'm Miss Sanders and I'm a lesbian, and just kind of got it out there. That most teachers we're absolutely terrified of being able to just bring any LGBT content into the classroom. And I can't believe that it took until 2003 to be repealed, which was the year, funnily enough, I actually started teaching practice. So I've been teaching for as long as Section 28 has been repealed. The dreadful thing is that actually its legacy still looms large, and people are still uncertain about what they can and can't say. The recourse for that one for senior leaders, if any parents object, and we do get parents objecting, is sorry, this is statutory. We have the Equality Act 2010, and we have a legal responsibility as a public body to promote mutual understanding between people with different characteristics. There we go. But the reality is most teachers are still uncertain about what they can and can't say.
So I didn't mean to cut you off because I was going to say ditto. I think Benny, yourself and I, we all kind of trained in the early 2000s. And there is that generational difference, isn't it, to the teachers who are a bit older, who trained in Section 28 and are still very, very fearful. And then there's the younger generation teachers coming through who are out and proud, like Sue was back then. So, Dream, what's your advice to the incoming generation of teachers about how they navigate some of that legacy? Because I hear horror stories about ECTs asking an interview about, like, is it okay to be out in this school, and they get told no. And I'm sure you get disclosures like that as well. What's your advice to anyone listening who is LGBTQI and starting their career?
I think the reality is, I would say, you should, I always say that you should not be afraid to be yourself. The reality is, though, that school cultures vary massively. And you hopefully, as part of induction, or even as part of things that are on the website, and I know it's very easy for people to like stick a rainbow flag up or something like that, rainbow books. It's really easy to do that sort of stuff. But visit the school, see, ask about it. Would it be a problem? Ask at interview. If I'm going to tell the children I'm gay or lesbian or trans, is it going to make a difference? How is it going to be received? And the reality is, you still might need to be quite picky about which school you go to.
Yeah, absolutely. And my final question about language, like I can remember doing that assembly, David, 20 years ago as a head of year. These are the words we're hearing in this school. We don't want to hear them. 15 years later, Benny did that assembly at our school. Like, these are the words that hurt me. I mean, I just feel like we're not really breaking the cycle of the fact that there's so much homophobic language that's just rife in our corridors, our playgrounds, our toilets. Like, what a couple of tips for schools about how to go about challenging the language we don't want to hear in our schools.
It needs to be a blanket approach from every single member of staff. It's like uniform. If one person doesn't correct a child's uniform, and I know people get quite heated about uniform, so pick whichever non-negotiable you have in your school. So whether it's uniform or whatever, if everyone does that, then it will not be challenged as much by the pupils, and it will wear away quite quickly over time. So it needs staff training, and it needs to be a leadership priority, and it needs to come from absolutely everybody. And staff need even the exact words. I think kind of scripting those sorts of encounters is actually really powerful.
I love that collective responsibility, reminding ourselves that this is safeguarding, and like you say, it's a team effort. That if we all nip it in the bud, we can change that culture. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope COVID doesn't get worse before it gets better. And happy wedding anniversary. Go enjoy the sunshine with your husband in your garden. Thank you so much, David. Take care. We'll speak to you soon.